welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast. Now, each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who offer exclusive insights, some inspiration, and a lot of guidance that helps practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello and welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg. I'm your host for today and I'm Early Years author and trainer. Now, throughout this series, we are going to be discussing a range of topics that aim at supporting best practice in the early years and that inspire you through guidance and resources that really will enhance your practice. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Kingston-Hughes. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
For anybody that hasn't come across you, I mean, how dare they? Can you just give us a little overview of who you are and what you do and what's brought you here today?
Yeah, well, I'm the managing director of a company called Inspired Children. So we tend to work with vulnerable children across the UK. So we have a team of people, and it's babies all the way up to 19-year-olds. So it's pretty much any age. And then because it soon turned out that makes no money at all, I started doing training and things like keynote speeches to subsidize our vulnerable children sessions. So if you see me on, doing a conference, that's the only reason I'm doing that. And then subsequently decided to write some books all about working with children. And I'm a play specialist, which is a weird thing to be in society, but that's me.
Not a play specialist is a great thing to be in society. And then the next 4 episodes, we're going to be talking with Ben all about different aspects of play. We've probably got enough content that we could do 4 weeks worth of chatting, because it's also something that I am really passionate about, because the impact that it can have, not just on children, but on adults who involve themselves in play, can be quite transformational. But to start this first episode, we're going to focus a little bit around imaginative play and the importance of imaginative play. But can we start just by kind of giving a very broad brush definition of what we mean by imaginative play?
Well, I think that's a good question, because imaginative play is probably quite a lot broader than we might think, because there's that tendency to think of it as, it's all fairies and unicorns, it's, dragons, stuff, and that is part of it, and that's a brilliant part. But quite often we'll have adults who will say, I'm not very imaginative, I'm not very creative. But actually it's anything where you're pretending something is something it's not. Right from the very simplest forms of symbolic representation, like pretending 2 lines on a page is actually the number 7. And only humans can do that. It's one of the brilliant things. Like dogs and cats will look at a number 7, for instance, and they're not seeing entire concepts of number. So that is just as imaginative, mathematics and any kind of calculation or assessing the world around you in a way that you can't see directly. That is imagination. So it's an incredibly broad subject. And we now know it's one of the most neurologically rich processes ever. But I think we still don't understand why. I think even with all the neuroscience that's coming out now, we still don't fully understand why human beings have made that leap. And it is an incredible leap. I mean, I don't want to break it to you, but dogs and cats, not massively imaginative.
This is true. But even, when you're lying on your back and looking at the clouds, and we are predisposed as human beings, we're always there going, there's a dog, there's a lion. The idea that you can create a world that exists outside of the world that you inhabit. That's key.
I don't think dogs and cats or mice do that. I don't think they look at the sunset and go, wow. It reminds me of.
Yes.
It's an incredible thing, is imagination.
I think as well, for children that we work with, we know that we're born with a lot of potentiality, so that, children aren't born with an imagination that's full of things to imagine about. It's life experience, story, their interactions they have with people, the experiences they have that help to feed that imagination. So I think one of the things we can do for ourselves as well as for children is to give them lots of opportunities to experience things that will help to feed and grow that imagination. Because if we don't feed and grow it, it's not going to grow.
No, and that is the one thing we do know. We don't know why it happens in human beings, but we do know it's the adults around the child that help to foster and support that imagination. So babies, again, not sure, but we don't think they have any imagination at all, because their conscious brain, and we think it's the upper brain, that's not yet fully formed in those babies. It's a long process. At some point, they've got a teddy bear that has always been an object. It's just a tactile sensory object. And then overnight, almost, it seems, it becomes Mr. Bigglethwaite and he's got a personality. It's that leap. And although we don't quite know why humans do it, we know it's upper brain, we know it's the really special bits of brain. but we do know it's adults. It's adults in that vicinity, and especially adults who are telling stories, who are pretending themselves, who are, messing around, putting on silly hats. It's that actually starts to inspire imagination.
I know with babies, sorry, Ben, I know with babies as well, you can, the idea that when it often is the juice cup type idea where you know the cup is empty, but you go, that's how you're going to pass it to the baby who can be quite young, and they take it and go, knowing. It's that transference of they're not going, oh, I saw you drink from this cup, I'm now going to try and drink. Hang on a minute, there's nothing in there. They buy into that pretense that we both know there's nothing in this cup, but I'm enjoying the interaction I'm having with you. So therefore, I'm also going to pretend there's nothing in the cup. So adults play a really important role, not just in being storytellers, but also that interaction that you have with children.
Yeah, we kind of become complicit in maintaining the imagination together. I think that's the really key thing. And there are some adults who will automatically not do that, or will come out of it, like, oh, what you silly lot up to, And what we try and get our settings and schools to do is actually have those times when everybody in the room is all doing. You've not got somebody clearing up in a corner. You've not got premises officer walking through going, oh God, what's this going on here? It's all of you together, and that's when we see some real magic happening. And especially for children that are struggling, of course, we work with vulnerable children. That's when you start to see them become almost like a different version of themselves, like a more powerful version, a more confident version. And quite often we've seen children who really thrive in the make-believe world, and it slowly begins to stick. It slowly begins to be there when they leave that imaginary space. We had a little boy who was, he got stammer, very chronic stammer, but it wasn't medical, it was environmental. It was his early childhood abuse, basically, that caused that. And we did pirate games, and we were all pirates, every member of staff. And he stood on a table and just shouted, "Let's save the mermaids, lads." And there was not even a single bit of stammer in his voice. And it was because the pirate version of himself was that little bit more powerful and was that little bit more confident. And that began to stay with him when we stopped doing the make-believe. And it took, weeks, if not months, but it actually helped improve his speech because he was enjoying the make-believe stuff and being a pirate. So it is powerful stuff.
And it's the wonder of imagination, isn't it? And even for adults, and even I'm thinking about the whole world of like online gaming, that you can create characters, you can be a persona that you're not, but within that, you have the power to be all the things that you wish you could be, or things that you want to try and do. And I think for children, we can enable them with that. But also in early stages, they are figuring this out in their head. And so there are things, I always remember being frustrated as a practitioner, but I see it a lot. The other day I was working with somebody, they put their hand into their bag with a group of children and pulled out a puppet. It was a squirrel on the end of her hand. And everybody's like, oh, there's a squirrel in my bag. And she did it beautifully. But that one lone voice said, "That is not a real squirrel." And they had this wonderful moment of, oh, there's a squirrel in my bag. And she was in afterwards, I was really annoyed. But then for that child who's trying to figure out in their head, what is real and what is imagined, they are going to say, well, but that's not a real squirrel. Because for some children, that's an uncomfortable transition into, oh, this is all a bit weird. You've got an imaginary squirrel on the end of your hand. But by the same token, it's about having lots and lots of those experiences to help children feel comfortable with that.
And some children will make full eye contact with the squirrel. They won't notice the hand. They won't even register it.
They're in the moment.
At the squirrel's bottom. It will purely be an actual thing. I know the children will struggle more with that. Subject of squirrels. I was talking about this exact thing the other day. I was talking about symbolic representation, how one thing being something else is actually the foundation for all maths, for all literacy, for all, even like the letter A. It's a circle and a line. It's a meaningless symbol, but we pretend it's something else. And so I'd got this bottle, and just as an example, I said, oh, so this isn't a bottle. This is my secret communicator that only speaks to squirrels. And at that precise moment, the head teacher's phone went off. And she went, oh, sorry, I've got to take this. So she left the room. Her entire staff team then thought she's secretly a squirrel. Brilliant. But when she came back in, she'd forgotten the squirrel link. So everyone's laughing at her, but she
had no idea why.
It actually turned into a slightly awkward moment where I'm trying to then explain, oh, no, anyway, it was one of those, training moments where
the other one is a
teacher is a squirrel. I wonder how many head teachers secretly are squirrels.
Oh, many, I would imagine. But also things we'll talk about role play later on, I'm sure. But the idea that sometimes you've got the lovely home role play, and it's been set up by an adult, and you've got bowls and cups, or often Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and you've got your three bowls, and then you find somebody's got the bowl on their head, the spoons become some kind of lightsaber, and they've got the kind of tablecloth as a cape. And often you'll hear adults say, well, that's the Goldilocks bowl, it's not a hat. But actually, the fact that a child has been able to say, I see this as a bowl, I know this is a bowl, all my life people have told me this is a bowl, but I am going to wear it as a space helmet hat. Yeah. That shows a level of creativity and imagination, which is way superior to saying this is a bowl, therefore it will always be a bowl.
Yeah, and there's a lot of studies on things like loose parts play, for instance, something I use all the time, and that is a branch of imagination where you're looking at random objects and you're seeing the possibilities. And I know you're a great advocate of stuff like that. But one of the things that is linked to children becoming creative adults is the concept of physical spontaneity in their world. And that means they are able to move that thing from that thing, to add it to that, to make something new that even the adults might not have thought of. And one of the key enemies of that is the adult. And we've all done it going, oh, that's not supposed to be used for that. Because if we'd never used stuff for what it wasn't supposed to be used for, we'd never have invented fire or the wheel or Marmite or any of the weird things that humans have invented. So you've got to sometimes be a bit less precious, haven't you? And just go, okay, I'd prefer it if that stayed in the home corner and didn't get used in the sandpit, but actually what they're doing.
That's where it needs to be.
So,
Or even the great invention of truffle Marmite, which I had the other day, which I didn't even know existed, has changed my world. But Marmite aside, I think we are talking about imaginative play, but we also think about things like when we have very prescriptive activities for children where we say, today we're going to make, or in the malleable materials area, we're going to make a hedgehog, or in the painting area, we're going to paint a rainbow because we're talking about that. That also really restricts children's opportunities to be imaginative. So when we're talking about imaginative play, we're not just talking about that free play space or the home corner or the small world. We're talking about the fact that when you go to paint and create, we really want children to be coached through the skills of painting and creating. And if they get really used to a diet of, when you go to this activity, this is what you're going to produce. And when you go here, this is what we're going to do. For their brain, they stop looking for opportunities to be creative.
Yeah, and that is crucial, especially if you want children to grow up to be creative problem solvers. And let's be honest, the human race needs creative problem solvers more than ever. And that's something we're really keen to get across to when I do training courses. It's like scaling things back from a goal-focused approach to a much more process-focused approach. Because if the child isn't fully engaged in the moment, enjoying that, whether it's doing artwork or whether it's mastery of a medium or even doing maths, then the child wants to do more. But also within that space, the child is now creating. The classic example is we do use clay with children. But we have a sculptor who was one of the children's grandmas who would come in and make clay pots with the children. And of course, none of the 4-year-olds can make a clay pot as well as a sculptor. So if they go, oh, can you make mine for me? So she made 30 clay pots for children. And now I'm not saying that's wrong, but if that's the only creativity they have, an adult has to finish it for them. So what we recommend is that you need to just give children clay. You don't tell them what to make. You let them explore. And then, if they make a clay pot, there's nothing wrong with celebrating that. But if they make a squishy mess that looks like a willy, doesn't matter, does it? Because it's
invariably, they will. Yeah. I was talking about this just the other day in terms of Diwali pots and saying Diwali is a great, celebration. We need to be aware of it. We need to talk about it, but we don't all need to make a clay pot, a thumb pot with a tea light in for Diwali. What we need to do is experiment with clay. And I think you're right. If you've got an older adult who's having a lovely interaction with a child where there is some warmth and there's conversation, then the creativity is floating around in there, but actually the primary purpose of that. But if that is happening every activity, every day, which it does for some children, then that kind of takes away their desire to be creative. They just learn that in this space, there's not a requirement for me to be creative. So I kind of dial that down. Whereas in spaces that are really open-ended with lots of support, children learn that being creative is the kind of general state to be in.
There seems to be an obsession with copying something the adult has done. And that's not creativity. That's the least amount of creativity is to actually try to copy something else. It's the originality, and that's what we need. And my son made me a Father's Day card years ago, and it got a thumbs up for the best dad. It's not true. I'll tell you that. Like many people who work with children, I'm a lot better at working with other people's children.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
I know. But he handed it to me, and he's only about 8 years old, and he went, "What I wanted to do a high five, but the teacher wouldn't let me." Yeah. And I'm not blaming the teacher, because of course you've got 30 children, you've got to get them out. Yeah. But it's the enemy of creativity. We need children to be able to do what they want, follow their own ideas and their own interests. And that's why play is so powerful for this, because it
is. And I think so much to talk about this all the time, but also play in terms of playful learning, in terms of how adults can be playful in their job, in their role, especially when you're working with children where you've got such a massive excuse to be playful on a daily basis. Yeah. And by that, I don't mean necessarily cartwheels and piggybacks or swinging from the lampshade in a sequined leotard. It doesn't have to be that kind of play, but the idea that it's open-ended, it's exploratory, failure is a good thing. If we get it wrong, it doesn't matter. We'll just think about it in a different way, and giving children that freedom to think in that way. And then that makes them more creative, more imaginative, and using like failure as a positive tool to learn from, as opposed to something like that doesn't look like my daffodil made out of an egg box, therefore it's not good enough.
Yeah, the inevitable comparison. If you're trying to copy something that somebody's set you, that's a built-in failure threshold. And what you don't actually need to be doing is exploring and experimenting. And then the great thing is what they've made is theirs, it's unique, 100% them, but there's not been a failure threshold for them to compare themselves against. So they don't feel rubbish, they want to do it again. And the more they want to do it, the more they're going to create more, and the more that cycle is going to continue, and they become more creative in their environments. And it's trying to get that across to people, that just that time and space to be creative is one of the most important things ever. And at the same time, lighting up the brain like a firework display, because that's what imagination does, which means it's growing the brain of the child in the future, because we now know that it's a use it or lose it scenario with brain. It could be the most powerful thing you ever do. I know we're running out of time, but I work in 2 identical schools, and in one, the same architect, same everything, but in one, their outdoor area is all loose parts. It's big crates. They've got free access to water. They've got buckets. They can dig holes. If there's a big bit of earth, they can just dig holes. And another group, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's much more the kind of more prescribed
structured.
It's like watching a different age group. They're exactly the same age, they're reception class children, but it's like watching a more advanced, the children who are exploring and investigating every single day, they just seem so much more advanced in their problem solving and the way they get so excited and they talk about it, so their communication language. And you barely see the workers sometimes because they're so, I don't know if this is accidental, but the bucket's got a hole in. So the children have to problem solve every time they want to get water.
Which is great,
Very clever stuff, but it is a significant difference. And this is, everything else is the same, social demographic, etc. Just having that freedom to explore in your outdoor area, it makes all the difference in the world. And that is just as much imagination as fairies and unicorns.
It is. And again, in the next episode, we're going to talk a lot about physical play. And I think there's a link here between physicality and also how that impacts on how your brain works, your mood, your attitude, and we'll dig in more into that in the kind of next episode. But for this one, again, so much we could have talked about. But if we're talking about 2 practitioners about takeaways around how you can create a space that promotes imagination, if we had just some top ideas about the sort of thing you could have within that space, what would you say?
It's all about the adults. And I think there are adults, and myself included, when I first started working with children, who feel more uncomfortable with the imaginative play than I would have done perhaps with the physical play. But I think we can't do that anymore. And even if we're not, every setting has got a really imaginative, creative person in. They've all got them in their team. And we tend to leave it to that person to do the stories or to do the make-believe. And I think children can't just see that kind of person doing it. They've got to see all of us. So it's a case of fake it till you make it. If you don't feel confident doing it, just do it. We had a lady who was really underconfident in terms of doing make-believe play. She went home one day, brought in her leopard skin onesie and ran around crawled around the outdoor area pretending to be a leopard. And it was one of the best days ever because the children treated her as an actual leopard. Now they knew it was her. You couldn't not know it was her, but it got an injured paw. So they bandaged this paw, and it was truly one of the great days in that. It was a nursery setting. But she beforehand almost refused to do that because she felt not confident. We've got to do it. We've got to pretend because it's the future of humanity, basically.
And I think children love to suspend that disbelief, and a lot of them will buy in. And if they don't buy in and say, is it you or you're not a real panther, that's not a criticism of your ability to be creative. It's their processing.
No.
And I think for me, as we come to the end of this episode, it's, as we talked about, having a more ambiguous space that allows for more exploration. So if we go back to the characteristics of effective learning, we see it in there, but trying to step away from some of the more prescribed things that we ask children to do. And yes, we're going to scaffold skills, and yes, we're going to give them experiences, but also allow them that breathing space to make whatever they want out of clay, even if it ends up being a clay willy. It's, it's about allowing them to have that self-expression.
And that's the title for the episode.
I thought it was going to be Truffle Marmite. Well, that's a lovely way to end our episode, Ben. So thanks very much to Ben Kingston-Hughes for chatting to us all about imaginative play. Don't forget to join us in the next episode, where Ben and I are going to explore physical play that can occur both indoors and outdoors. But for now, Ben, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest today, Ben, for joining us and providing such valuable insights into play. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Ben Kingston-Hughes. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes, and also access exclusive follow-up content, which will include ideas for your settings and lots of links to relevant resources.